Imagine reading a story about your own passing, but while you're still alive. And what it says about you is so brutal, it changes the rest of your life. And that's just where the story starts. Stick around. Welcome back to Adventures in History. I'm your host Danny, and every week we dig up a fun, surprising true story from the past that the whole family can enjoy. Let's get into today's episode. Let's start this off with a strange one. Imagine you're picking up the morning newspaper, you're flipping it open, and you find a story about your own passing. Right there, printed in ink for the entire country to read. Except you didn't pass, you're very much alive. You're reading it, you're right there. You're holding the newspaper. And that actually happened to a real person in the year 1888. And what this man read about himself in that newspaper was so harsh, so unflattering, that it changed the entire rest of his life. And in fact, that's the reason you probably heard his name before, even though you don't quite know why yet. Now I'm going to tell you exactly what happened in that newspaper, but not yet, because first, we need to go all the way back to the beginning and meet the boy that this eventually happened to. A boy who grew up surrounded by explosions, inventions, and a family that never seemed to catch a break. Welcome to Adventures in History. Let's get into it. So our story begins in Stockholm, Sweden on October 21st, 1833. That's the day Alfred Nobel was born. He was the third son of an engineer named Emanuel Nobel and his wife, Henriette. And Alfred's dad was a genuine inventor. He was a man of science. He built bridges, he designed buildings, and he spent a lot of time kind of tinkering with different ways to blast through solid rock. But that same year that Alfred was born, unfortunately, his father's business completely fell apart. This is a business that he had worked on for many years, and it seemed to just not go his way. And so a few years later, after deliberating for quite a while about what to do with his next steps, Emanuel packed up and he left Sweden to go try his luck in Finland and Russia. And he left his wife and children, his wife Henriette, behind in Stockholm, Sweden, to take care of the family. And let's just pause for a second here, because I think we need to reflect on what that family had to go through, right? Emanuel Nobel was running a business, was supporting a family he was doing really well. And then in one fell swoop, things didn't go that great. So he had to make the decision, and he had a very difficult decision to make. This was a man in the 1800s who was expected to support his wife and children. And he packed up his bags and he decided to make a very difficult decision to basically move 1,000 kilometers away to try his luck in a different country. And let's just reflect on Henriette here. Henriette, his wife, had several children at the time. It was Alfred and I believe 2 other siblings, and she had her work cut out for her as well. She had to put food on the table. She was left while her husband, again, over 1,000 kilometers away, she had to do her part. She was expected to take care of the children while her husband went and tried his luck in a different country. So a few years go by, everybody's doing their part, and in fact, she ends up opening a small grocery store just to keep things afloat. Now, eventually, Emmanuel figures it out. A lot of sleepless nights in a different country, looking at a picture of his family on the wall every night and just grinding through, just struggling through, trying to build his business back up. But eventually things turn around, and Emmanuel's new workshop in St. Petersburg, it started doing really well. He even built equipment for the Russian army. And by 1842, that whole family was able to reunite in Russia, and they rejoice. What an incredible achievement. And young Alfred and his brothers, they got an incredible education from private tutors in science, in languages, in literature, in history. In fact, by the time Alfred was 17 years old, he apparently could speak 5 or 6 different languages fluently. Alright, now here's a fun little detail. Alfred's true passions growing up were chemistry and physics. We're not surprised about that. But he also had another passion which you would not expect, and that was poetry. But his father, being a man of science, having a logical mind, had zero interest in raising a poet. Emmanuel wanted his sons to be engineers, scientists, inventors, just like him. So he made a decision. He sent young Alfred to Paris to study and become a proper chemist. Emmanuel thought that this move would kind of settle things down and, put his son on a correct path, or a sensible path at least. Well, it didn't really work out that way. Not even close, because in Paris, Alfred is about to meet someone and something that would completely take over the rest of his life. And we're gonna head into part 2. Alright, so while working in a chemistry lab in Paris, Alfred Nobel met a young Italian chemist named Ascanio Sobrero. And a few years later, Sobrero had invented something new, a clear, oily liquid called nitroglycerin. And we're going to come back to nitroglycerin in a second, but here was the problem with nitroglycerin. It was unbelievably powerful. I mean, far more powerful than gunpowder even. But it was also wildly, dangerously unpredictable. In fact, they could explode just from a little bit of extra heat. In fact, even Sobrero himself, the inventor, was so frightened by his own invention that he actually spoke out against anyone trying to use it for anything at all, really. And most people, hearing a warning like that from the very inventor of the stuff, they would probably back away completely. But Alfred Nobel, well, he wasn't most people, and he does the opposite. He looked at this liquid that terrified even its own creator, and he thought, you know what? I can figure out how to control this. And so when Alfred finished his studies and he went back to Russia, he teamed up with his father. And together, they started trying to turn this unstable, dangerous liquid into something safe. Something safe to actually use for real construction work, for blasting tunnels or clearing rock or building things, instead of just destroying them. And it was going to take a lot of trial and error to make that happen. And unfortunately, in this particular line of work, a small error can be a very serious word. Let's head into part 3. So around this time, the Nobel family business had been supplying equipment to the government and their army. But once their contract ended, the demand for their product unfortunately dried up, and it happened almost overnight. And the family business somehow, once again, collapsed into serious financial trouble all over again. And Alfred's parents, well, they decide to move back to Sweden from Russia. And his 2 older brothers, Robert and Ludwig, they choose to stay behind, where they eventually build up a completely different fortune in the oil business. I mean, that entire family was pretty gifted. But Alfred stayed laser focused on one single goal, turning nitroglycerin into something safe. And he was going to have his work cut out for him, because back in Sweden, he basically threw himself completely into experimenting with it. He tested different ways to work with this incredibly unstable liquid. I mean, he was determined to make this substance actually safe to work with. Unfortunately, quote unquote safe, was about to become the one thing that went horribly, tragically missing. Let's head into part 4. In September of 1864, Alfred had a bit of a disaster. There was an explosion at the building where the Nobel family was preparing their nitroglycerin. It was a serious accident, and among the people that we lost that day was Alfred's own younger brother, Emil. It's a genuinely sad moment for the family in this history, and so we're not going to dwell on the details, but here's what happened next. The local government was so alarmed by the accident, they banned Alfred from running any more experiments anywhere within the city of Stockholm. Now, most people at this point, and they got banned from their own work, well, they might have simply walked away for good. And you know what? We wouldn't blame Alfred for doing so. But Alfred, again, was not most people. He didn't walk away. Instead, he came up with a workaround that was absolutely genius and honestly a little bit wild. See, since he couldn't legally experiment on land inside the city anymore, he moved his entire operation onto a barge, basically a flat-bottomed boat, floating out on the lake called Malaren. Picture that for a second. A man alone on a small boat in the middle of a lake, carefully mixing one of the most unpredictable liquids on Earth. I mean, what could go wrong, right? And if anything did go wrong out there, well, I guess at least they wouldn't take the building down with it. And he was out on that lake, through careful, patient experimentation, that Alfred finally found that breakthrough that he had been chasing his entire time. Let's head into part 5. Here's what Alfred figured out. If you take nitroglycerin, remember that very unstable liquid, and you mix it with a soft and crumbly sand-like material called kiselgur, something remarkable happens. That dangerous liquid transforms into a thick, moldable paste, almost like clay, that you can then safely shape into rods and you can place exactly where you need it. It was every bit as powerful as before, though. In fact, it was maybe even more powerful, and now maybe actually useful. But now it was actually stable enough to handle. You could transport it, you could actually use it. And Alfred made this discovery in 1866, and he got an official patent on it the following year in 1867. Now, here's a fun little detail that most people actually don't know. Alfred actually considered calling this new invention Nobel's safety powder, which honestly would be pretty reasonable, except it's pretty boring, right? You cannot market something with a name like that. So he looked to the ancient Greeks, and he pulled out the word dynamis, meaning power. And that's how the world ended up with the name dynamite. And dynamite, well, it absolutely took off. It got used everywhere, blasting tunnels through mountains, clearing paths for railroads, building canals, bridges. And within just a few years, Alfred had factories running in 90 different locations in more than 20 countries. He traveled so often between them that people started calling him Europe's richest vagabond. Vagabond is just a person who basically travels a lot. And he went from kind of a poor band experimenter on a rowboat to one of the wealthiest inventors in the entire world. So here's where you'd expect the story to pretty much end, right? I mean, you got the happily ever after, right? He's rich, he's famous, he's respected everywhere. Except that's not quite what happened. Because remember that newspaper from the very beginning of this episode? The one that Alfred opened one day and read and was shocked to find out what was inside that newspaper? Well, it's time to find out exactly what was in it. Let's head into part 6. Alright, in 1888, Alfred's brother Ludwig unfortunately passed away while staying in France. And some journalists got a hold of that story. They found out pretty early, and they had published the story in some French newspapers. But those newspapers didn't really do their work very well because they got the two brothers mixed up. And mistakenly, they believed that it was Alfred who had passed, not Ludwig. In fact, one of those papers, a very well-known French newspaper, ran a story on the wrong brother. And it wasn't kind. The actual, verified version of that story read, "A man who can only with the utmost difficulty be considered a benefactor of mankind passed yesterday at Cannes. It is Mr. Nobel, inventor of dynamite." Mr. Nobel was Swedish. Now if you do a quick search of this story online, you're going to come across an even more dramatic version of the story. A headline that literally read, "The Merchant of Death is dead." And it accused them of getting rich by creating a very dangerous invention. But that version has actually been repeated for decades. It's in books and it's in articles all over the world. But apparently, it's a myth. And here is an honest little myth check for you. Historians have never actually been able to prove that the harsher version ever existed in print at all. It might actually be a bit of an exaggeration that kind of grew over time, added by biographers years later. Nobody's found the actual newspaper page with those exact dramatic words on it. But here's the thing. Regardless of whether it was the milder version or the more harsh version, it was harsh enough to genuinely shake Alfred Nobel to his core. Because reading a version of the world, essentially telling him, hey, when you pass, this is what people are going to remember. A man who built his fortune on dangerous inventions. It clearly affected him deeply. Because a few years later, Alfred Nobel made a very quiet, very private decision that would end up defining his entire legacy. And it's probably why you know his name today. Let's head into our final part of the story. So on November 27th, 1895, Alfred Nobel sits down at the Swedish-Norwegian Club in Paris, and he signs his last will and testament. And it was a huge surprise to almost everyone, including his own family, who had no idea what was coming, because in that will, Alfred left the vast majority of his enormous fortune to create the 5 brand new prizes, to be awarded every single year to people who had done the most good for humanity: physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. Alfred Nobel actually passes away just a year later on December 10th, 1896, at his home in San Remo in Italy at the age of 63. And his family? Well, wasn't really thrilled about this plan at first. They open up the will and they find out all that money is going to be donated to charity. He left nothing to the family. That's a big shock. And it actually took about 4 years of legal back and forth before everything was sorted out. But finally, in 1901, the very first Nobel Prizes are awarded, exactly as asked. And they're still being awarded every single year, well over a century later. Alright, so let's pull this whole story together. We met a poetry-loving kid who got shipped off to become a chemist instead. We watched him become obsessed with the most dangerous liquid of his era. Right after its own inventor warned everyone to stay away from it. We saw real tragedy strike his family. We saw his father reinvent himself a couple of times. And we watched Alfred respond by moving his experiments onto a boat in the middle of a lake rather than having to give up. We followed him to one of the most useful inventions of the 1800s, and then to the strange, uncomfortable moment where he got to read the world's harsh opinion of him. And in the end, that uncomfortable moment is exactly what pushed him to leave behind something completely different, an award that, to this day, has nothing to do with explosives at all, and everything to do with recognizing the very best of what people can achieve. So here's a fun thought to leave you with. Most of us will never get the strange and uncomfortable opportunity that Alfred Nobel had to read the world's opinion of us before we're gone and still have the chance to change it. He got that chance, and he used it to turn his name into something people now associate with peace, science, and progress, instead of the thing that that newspaper had assumed he'd be remembered for. So as you look around your own life, what amazing thing would you like to give the world? Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure in history. Hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, will you hit that like button and subscribe if you like these stories? And if you know anyone who will enjoy this, will you share it with them? It'll mean the world to me. I'll catch you next time.